a kid literally of the same age, uh, halfway around the world, their daily lives are going to be a lot different than my kid's daily life. If they don't work or they don't do what they're supposed to, they don't eat,
Mm.
right? And we, there's a lot of heartbreaking stories. Just my wife gives out scholarships to these kids, so connecting first world kids with third world kids, they have an interaction so they can see both can see each other's lives. So hopefully both, obviously the third world kid can have an education, can be enriched that way, but hopefully the first world kid can also see the other life, so both can be enriched and both can help make an impact in the world.
Hi, Young. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. How you doing there, Nicholas?
Good, good. Give me 1 second. I had some issues with my earphones. I'm just sorting that out real quick.
Not a problem.
All right. Can you still hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Awesome.
Video
Well,
or no video?
video. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, okay.
Welcome, everyone, to The Pupil's Life. And welcome to my guest today, Dung Duong, who is the author of Shifting Optics, A Life in Perspective. Thank you for being here, Young.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very curious that, the first thing when I was looking at your book, the first thing that stood out to me was the cover. I don't think I've seen a cover like it, and I'm not sure what your involvement was with the cover, but I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about it.
Sure. So obviously, I didn't come up with the idea. My team did, the publisher did. But yeah, I had some inputs. Interesting part about the cover is obviously trying to get the word perspective involved, right? Or is it my side view, or am I looking? I'm looking to the side, or am I looking forward? So yeah, I think that was a good collaboration. I wish I could say that it was my idea, but I only had a small input in it.
Yeah. And the name of the book, where did you come up with that?
So my profession, I graduated with 2 degrees from Rose Hall Institute of Technology, one of which is in optics, another in mechanical engineering. So certainly when we were raising kids, I definitely wanted to do some perspective. And obviously my wife's charity is Perspective Charity. So certainly the word perspective was definitely going to be in the title one way or another. And certainly with the word perspective and vision and eye, going back to my profession of being an optical engineer, seem appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it seems appropriate also for my experience reading the book. I mentioned in my review of the book that one of the challenging things for me was, or I guess it challenged my perspective a lot, because I think you share some of this. I think as people, we become so hard and set in our perspective and like what's worked for us that we make this assumption that like, well, everybody should be, we see the world as we are, not as it is. And so it was very nice to be challenged by the book. And it was also uncomfortable at times, because it's uncomfortable to look at yourself and to question, how much is this serving me and how much of this is conditioning from my childhood. But before we get too deep into that, could you give people who don't know anything about the book just a brief overview of what they might get if they read the book?
So my book, the original intent of my book was written for my kid, right? Leave a little legacy piece for my kids and having an understanding of what dad went through to get to where he is today, with teaching points along the way. Well, my goal was to have them, as they age, get into their teenage years and in their 20s, to have a book, a companion when I'm not around. Sort of look at my some of the stories I have and see hopefully some teaching points that they can just hold with them. Right? I don't know how you are with your parents and stuff like that, and I know how I am with my parents, and I know you've. I think your stories, you've had some pretty rough times as well. But we don't necessarily go back to our parents when needing advice or something like that. So I was hoping the book would be that for them in their time of need. As I was writing the book, a couple events happened in my life that really sort of changed my perspective, even on the outlook of what the book should be. And unfortunately, it was two tragic events. Two of my friends' child, I guess wouldn't be a child anymore. They're young adults. One was 20 and one was 25, 26. Sort of tragically took their own lives. And when that happened, I sort of thought about what my, why am I writing the book, and what's the purpose of it. So I made it a little bit more general, shortened it up a little bit, took a lot of my the legacy piece that I typically would put in there, all my accomplishments and stuff, and really just make it a book about just trying to see the world in a slightly different place. Unfortunately, I've been to the edge as well. I've been there, having grown up the way I did. I sort of worry about just my kids' generation, next generation, future generations, not being able to see ways out. Like you said, when you're in a situation, unfortunately, at times you're just locked into that situation, whether it's dark or light. You're stuck in this endless loop of the mindset, constantly thinking about probably things you shouldn't be. And my hope is that the book just gives you a little bit of perspective about how to just take a step back and sort of, I've certainly gone through things in the book, good, bad, and different, right? But take a step back and see if there's another way to look at the problem, or look at the situation, and persevere through the hardest of times. I wholeheartedly believe that if you just take a step back, take a deep breath, and I'm being metaphorical here, so not exactly that, but certainly change your perspective a little bit. It may, and obviously the book, all my experiences won't be germane to the current generation, but hopefully the lessons that I've learned can help.
And so you mentioned that you've been to the edge. I'm curious, how did you take a step back in those moments? What perspective did you find?
So I looked at certainly, I didn't want to address the topic directly in the book, just because it's going to be my kids and sort of that situation. I sort of wanted to look at it from just a slightly different sort of way. This is how I went through it. This is how, and different parts of the book, you could probably get a sense of where I was at the edge some of those times. But even the conclusion statement, the thing that always allowed me to be able to take a step back was having a external focus, one that's just not so much me, one that has a dependence on people thinking about what my situation, or what I did, how other people would perceive it, or how other people would react to it, or how other people have to live with it. Certainly, in any situation where you're looking at through your own lens, you get self-absorbed, and I was definitely self-absorbed in the pain I was in, the pain I wasn't in. What can I do to get over those moments? But when dark times became really dark, it's always been, hey, how would my actions affect my sister? How would my actions affect even my parents? How would my actions affect my friends and family? How would my action affect others that really helped me pull through some of those darker moments. And that's why, I always go back to having perspective. Obviously, when you're in this situation, everything's through your eyes, everything's you're seeing it. And hopefully, when you're in deep in those moments, you can take a step back and see if you can see a broader picture and seeing how your life really does affect almost everyone around you. And obviously, as I grew older, that becomes more and more hits home a lot more when you see my kids and stuff like that. It's just how my life certainly affects not only my immediate family, but the surrounding, the community, everything like that.
Absolutely. And you mentioned your kids and this book being for them in case you're not around. I'm not sure if this is mentioned in the book, but so I read a while ago, maybe 5-6 years ago, when I first moved to Austin, I read Randy Pausch's book, The Last Lecture, which he dictated, right, to somebody else that was like writing it down because he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer and he wasn't going to be around to see his kids grow up, but he wanted to, similar to you, he wanted to impart his wisdom for when he wasn't around. Are your kids, how old are your kids? Because you don't look like a very, very old man. You don't look like you're going to be leaving us anytime soon.
Yeah. So I'm hoping not to be leaving them even when they grow up either. But I think the leaving part is both metaphorical. Right? So as you grow away from your parents, certainly, you take advice from your friends and your peers more than you do your parents when you're in your 20s. So my kids are just, they're 10-year-old. My eldest is 10.
Okay.
So it'll be another decade or so before she leaves and start the world and impose her will in the world. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, my goal has always been to obviously I want to be around, but who knows what happens. And certainly as is, kids do grow apart from the parents. Hopefully they come back. Most the teenage years, right? What is it? Girls leave and comes back before high school, and then boys leave and don't come back till much later in life. So we'll see what the gods have in store for me and my kids here.
Yeah. Do you? I'm sure you haven't made such extreme plans, but like, do you envision yourself, 10, 15 years from now, sort of presenting your kids with the book and what do you envision that experience being like?
That's a tough question. They're already wanting to read the book.
Oh wow.
And I sort of said, yeah, let's wait till at least high school, and let's wait until you're a little bit more mature. And there's nothing in that book that it's probably not even PG. It's probably G. Really, there's nothing in there that's really all that bad. It's just whether I want them to start. There's definitely deeper meanings within some of the stories, and whether I want to approach those topics with them. When is a good time to start approaching those topics? Is the key. So, and of course, if they just read it for the story, they can. But it's there's deeper. Hopefully, you get different perspective on the story as well.
Yeah, and I just out of curiosity, do they know? I mean, of your background and your struggles in your younger life yet, or?
No, they really don't. They part of the reason why I sort of wanted to write the book was to give them that perspective, right? I do worry that they live in a bubble, a little bit of a bubble. Obviously, we live in a gated community. Their friends are, their friends. They don't. Certainly, they're not going to see what I saw when I was younger. And I wonder and worry whether that is beneficial or not at times, right? They're going to grow up, they fight over toys and they fight over, they don't have the chores, they don't have the, they don't necessarily have faced the problems that I did, and that's to me that what makes people stronger too, right? Without that, I wonder whether they'll have the just the right viewpoint of the world, right? Sort of optics to see that there is a much tougher life. Right? I think you've gone through a lot of that. Whether they can, be better. I certainly don't wish what I went through to them, but I definitely want them to sort of understand that there is a different part of the world and how they need to, since they have the resources, they need to step up and really do help the world somehow, make an impact.
Yeah, and that's a great, a great debate to have with yourself. And I have that same debate with myself, even though I'm not even close to having children. Is, you know, I don't think that a child should go through what you went through or what I went through or what, anybody who struggles goes through. But yet we do have this, we romanticize it like, well, the struggle is what made me who I am today. And you say you still have this debate with yourself. Do you believe people need to struggle to be able to make the world a better place?
So that's a there was a quote of one of the founders. I think his dad said to him, and I'm going to botch this up and screw this up royally, but he said one of his biggest regret was not giving his son the struggle that he went through growing up, and that's taking it to probably a little bit of an extreme, and I certainly don't wish to my kids, right? But I do believe that information is power, and they sort of need to understand that there's another world out there, and that's one of the reasons why my wife started her charity, Perspective Charity. So it's really the Perspective Charity is really connecting third world kids with obviously kids in their neighborhood and kids in the U.S. where a kid literally of the same age, halfway around the world, their daily lives are going to be a lot different than my kids' daily life. If they don't work or they don't do what they're supposed to, they don't eat, right? And there's a lot of heartbreaking stories. My wife gives out scholarships to these kids. So connecting first world kids with third world kids, they have an interaction so they can both can see each other's lives. So hopefully both, obviously the third world kid can have an education, can be enriched that way, but hopefully the first world kid can also see the other life, so both can be enriched and both can hopefully make an impact in the world somehow. But going through it, there's been a lot of stories. You see pictures. You see, my wife's actually gone back with my eldest to Vietnam to give out scholarships, to give out school supplies, and it's I think it's a different world. Certainly I've struggled and I've been that third world kid, and I don't wish that on my kid, but certainly I hope that they're being enriched by seeing it, being enriched by understanding that their lives are privileged, right? Being born in the U.S. is a privilege, and one of the questions is, what are you going to do with that privilege? Are you going to waste it away, or are you going to do something with it? And that whole, I keep talking about impact, and I don't mean that change the world impact. I don't mean coming up with a bunch of inventions and being a Nobel laureate of this sort. But the impact is to me pretty simple, right? Just doing good, just doing something better for not yourself, but someone around you.
Yeah.
And that's just small. If everyone does that, I think the world will be just that much better.
I 100% agree with that. I think I don't want to get into the topic of politics, but I think that's where it often fails, right? Is that there's no accountability in politics.
Yeah, we can get into a whole debate about, or not debate, but a whole yeah. I'm certainly, I'll just leave it as I'm certainly an immigrant, and I've certainly been an illegal immigrant. Maybe not to the U.S., but at one point I had to leave my country on a boat, and some other country had to accept me. So
yeah,
I'll just leave it at that.
I am curious though. You start each chapter with a little excerpt from your time on that boat, and then there's a longer chapter where you talk more about your experience escaping. Was there, and you kind of mentioned this already, was there anything you didn't include in the book that you were on the fence about?
I think there's always stuff that you don't want to get into too much detail on. Certainly the boat trip we left twice. I think both of them are in the book. But yeah, there's unfortunately, boat trips and people leaving and absconding from a country isn't exactly the it's difficult. Right? My memory is only so, at the time it can only carry me so far. But yeah, there's a lot of stories. Certainly, my having talked to my uncles, my mom and dad about the trip, there's certainly not only from my eyes but from their eyes about what happened as well. And we didn't include a lot of that. There's a lot of one of the things that I didn't want to do was be too jovish on the whole woe is me life. I sort of wanted to touch the topic, but not go into all the things that were bad. Right? So I just didn't want to have everyone dwell on that aspect of it instead of the learning aspect of it. What I got from it. So, yeah, details. That's a beer and a bar to get more details somewhere.
And can I ask why you made that choice to not dwell on the woe is me?
Yeah, I think I worry it would take away from the book. I think as a book to teach my kids or life lessons, I didn't want the audience to come out with it and say, "Wow, you went through a lot of bad stuff." Well, and just dwell on that. I want it to be, yes, I want this bad stuff, but have it be a moment to teach something instead of dwell on some aspects of it that just then you go through that realm. You can just continue going, all the bad stuff, and you may not get the perspective that I'm trying to get the teaching points for my kids I want to get out.
Yeah. And that's a good segue, because I know I said I wasn't going to get into politics, and it's only minorly doing it, but even though I'm half Hispanic, I feel when I'm in the US like that, I don't even feel that I am a minority, because I don't consider myself to look very Hispanic. But I still engage, and I hear a lot about systemic oppression, and like you had arguably, like the worst setup you could have to start a life in the US is you're like the template for it, and yet you are very successful. You have a family. What is your, I don't want to say advice, but like, how can people that are going through what you went through, or who have it not as privileged as someone like me might, how can they not dwell on that and focus also on, how you said, on the positives?
I think there's always ways to always look at ways to say no. I tell my engineers it's the same thing. If I ask you to do something and you tell me it's hard or it's very difficult or it's impossible, then my question to you is, why did I even hire you? Right? I can hire anyone to tell me it's no, or it's impossible, it's very difficult to do, right?
Yeah.
The secretary or the marketing or the salespeople. I hired someone with a specific talent to be able to do something, and if you can't do it, find a way to do it, right? And that's just I think that's part of the perspective I want to get into people, is that there's always a way, right? It may not be exactly the way you thought would be, but there's always a way to do something. And that goes back to whether it's an engineering problem, or whether it's a sales problem, whether it's an ops problem, whether it's a growing up in hardship problem. Because you can always say, well, I'm being oppressed, and therefore, the road for me to success is longer than another person, and you can just dwell on that and not take the first step. Well, like, you just got to go overcome that, right? So work harder, work better, work smarter, do what it takes to get the job done, instead of trying to dwell on all the things that are not in your favor. And unfortunately, I always tell a lot of my friends that I very rarely, or I can name a handful of times when it's blatant racism, with me, like absolutely blatant, right? But and there are other times with looks and stuff like that, but I don't let that really affect me at all. Like I could probably look someone in the eye and say I've never really been uh, I guess on the wrong side of racism.
Hmm.
Even though obviously it's you have, right. I don't dwell on it at all, and I don't look at it at all. I've always uh, you know I went to a Rose Home Institute of Technology, which is in the middle of Indiana, literally nowhere. Caliber, the thing. There's a paper mill that stunk up the town. There's a federal prison in there, but literally in the middle of nowhere. Probably cow tipping was a big thing. I don't know. I never went. but pretty much, I was probably, I don't know the exact stat, but probably one of very few Asians in my class. A few meaning less than. I thought it was the only one, but certainly, there might be one or two others in my class. But yeah, so you can always look at it and say, hey, what did I get myself into, right? And I made some jokes about that too in the book. But I certainly, I broke through with a lot of people. I some of my probably friends have never seen an Asian before, sort of thing. And I think there's a lot of and there were certainly people who looked at me differently at first, and I had to break through some walls to get through to people. But I think it's as a minority in the U.S., just work harder, better. Don't dwell on anything. Just do better. Because if you dwell on something, like you said, it'll always be a crutch. You can always say, well, it's because of that I didn't do something. And yeah, life. I always tell my kids to say, life isn't fair. Life just isn't fair. If you think life is fair, then I've done badly as a parent. Life isn't fair. Just get over that fact, and then get things done.
Yeah.
What do I have to take out the trash? Well, I don't want to do it. So you're the kid. Guess who gets to do it? Life isn't fair,
right? That's really funny. There are a lot of
joke a lot, by the way.
of course. And there are. I wrote down a couple of lines like, there is always a way, little snippets like that really resonate with me. And another one, maybe the one that resonated with me the most, was I don't want to win against people I care about. And the reason it resonated was because being a writer, I've had moments where I'll write a story about, events that took place where friends of mine were involved, and some of them will say, I don't want this to be public. And I'm like, all right, well, but I've changed your name. I've changed nobody's going to recognize you. And still they are hesitant. And I, in my egotistical creative head, I'm like, they don't have a reason to be upset. I've done all the things that I can do. And like, I find a way to win against somebody that I care about. And when I publish that, and times that I haven't, I feel like slightly uncomfortable about it, and so can you talk a little bit about your experience with that and what you mean by that?
Well, I think as a competitive person, right? I grew up fairly competitive, whether it's sports or academics, or I think I didn't even touch this in elementary school, but I lost to a girl in elementary school, and the only reason she beat me in grades because her handwriting was better. But I was much, I still remember today, right? I'm fairly. I remember all the nuances of why I didn't win about certain things. But winning, as you grow up, winning isn't everything, right? Once once you've reached a certain point, and I wish I knew this when I was younger too, when I was going through all those times, but I didn't when I'm really kicking myself for it. But winning is great, right? In life and stuff like that. You're successful. Woohoo, great. You've done something well. You've made some money. You've done this. But you don't want to do that in spite of people around you. or in spite of, you don't want to, what is it, climb over people or stomp over people to get to your success. And I believe that even when I was younger and now, even more so. And I'm the type of guy who looks at, what is it? There's a word, what is it? You haven't succeeded or something like that. I can't remember the line, but others must fail. Right? You haven't succeeded, others must fail. If everyone succeeds, no one succeeds. Sort of thing. Those are the sort of comments I sort of grew up with, right? But not with those close to you, because at a certain point, it's like me beating my kids. Like, well, what's the point? Or me being better at my wife or something. What's the point? Better those you care about, right? Me and my partners go into something, and we, one catches a bigger fish. Great, what they do, right? It's not. At some point, it's yeah. There's competitive fire, and you want to do it. But if it makes someone sad or makes someone something that hurts someone else, it's really not worth it. At the end of the day, the relationships you have, unfortunately, one thing about writing this book that's interesting is that you broadcast it out, and you get all these friends that you haven't talked to in a while, kind of chime in. But relationships are fleeting, right? You don't want to ruin relationships over petty sort of things to win at, right? And you don't want to make an impact in the world by stepping over people either. Do it the right way, and things will be there. That's
You
a lot
also
of rambling to that too.
No, it reminded me also of the part where you mentioned you and your wife and how she thinks she never wins arguments, but it's because if you've lost an argument, you just accept the defeat and sort of, you almost see that as a win. And that's incredibly, I'm single right now, but when I've been in relationships, that is probably my biggest hurdle. So how do you view it as a win?
I think it's interesting. I'm going to say this, and people are going to probably laugh at me, and you're probably going to become full of something. I've been called that a lot in college too, with my name and everything. But I do like I do like critical thinking. I do like the challenge. So you get into a situation where you're so complacent. You've developed this technology, you keep doing it. It's kind of boring. You need that challenge. You need something that challenges you mentally. I do all these physical stuff, challenges you physically, because to me, it's not about being right or wrong. It's about discovering something about yourself, or discovering something about the situation that's better. Gaining knowledge of something. So in a lot of ways, and people call me, full of a lot of stuff, because I do like being wrong, because I do like discovering something. Being always right sucks. It really, I know it sounds kind of weird, but it really does suck in a lot of ways. And discovering something new, being passionate about, critical thinking, allowing yourself to be out there. I always say this about engineering. Sorry, I revert back to engineering a lot, but that's just, I'm training. But if you engineered something and you've done it over and over again, so that there's no chance of mistake being made, what's the point? At some point it's going to be so boring. It's like, you're not taking risks. Great innovation, great invention has to come with a risk, and that risk is going to be you're putting yourself out there. You're going, as an author, you see this. You're putting yourself way out there, and people may take it in a good way. People may take it in a bad way, but all are sort of learning sort of experiences, or discovering something new. And engineering is the same way. It's discovering something innovative, something better. And I sort of see that myself too. I have an argument with my wife. If I'm wrong, I just move on. I'm going, hey, I made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. No one's perfect, right? But too often times we get hung up on just little things, and that little thing becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. The next thing you know, you're arguing about something and you probably forgot about what you argued in the first place about, because you built up all this other anger. It's taken my wife a little bit of time, but she's starting to realize that I don't really fight.
Yeah.
In a certain ways, if I know I'm wrong, I will be stubborn until I'm proven wrong. But most of the time, if I'm wrong, I'm the first to say I'm sorry. Like if I ever offend anyone, I'm just I don't even argue about it. Like if I say something and it's even the least, I don't think it's offensive, but if you think it's offensive, it's up to me to say I'm sorry. Right? It's just right. However you perceived it, you're the person perceiving it, not me. I said something, you perceived it correctly, incorrectly, it doesn't matter. You're offended. I'm probably the first one to say I'm sorry in those situations. Because it's not, I can't say how you perceive something, right? I don't
Right.
know. Yeah, so I don't want to be that guy who justifies my actions to thinking you should have read me a certain way, you should have known, blah blah blah, all that stuff. If it offends you, hey, I'm sorry. Let's move on. I don't try to dwell on little things anymore.
Yeah, that's probably, I mean, what you just described at the very end is exactly the behavior that I, fall back on as a defense mechanism, is like trying to rationalize why this person was offended and why that's not my fault or whatever. But you always end up feeling worse if you get to convince them of that. It's like, it's not a,
Yep.
And so
I can't say I've learned this through the easy way. Like I thought about this. I think with age comes wisdom, and that wisdom is you failed a lot.
right.
That's why I cherish the failures, right? Too. Because those are all learning experiences. You have to get. There's certain things you just have to go through in life. Gather the wisdom, and I know my kids are gonna do things that I tell them not to. They're gonna have to gather their wisdom themselves. Uh, but I think it's important to go out there and learn and embrace times when you fail. And I think too often in the U.S. we sort of get worried about our pride gets hurt too much when we fail, that we just can't admit it or can't own up to it. And that's to me that can be self-defeating over time.
What's something right now that you're that you are still sort of coming to terms with, maybe that you were wrong, or something that you're starting to question, maybe my idea around this is not what I thought it was?
I think there's in my book I talked about no regrets, right? Then a couple of my friends say, no regrets, are you serious? Right? They're calling me out on it, like left and right. I'm saying, I think what I was meaning by no regrets is don't dwell on past regrets, because there's nothing you can do about it at this point, unless someone invents a time machine for you to go back to that moment and make the decision. There's nothing you really do, and I worry a lot about people just dwelling. Oh, if I only did this, things would be turned out. Yeah, what's the point? Don't worry about things you can't change. Only worry about things you can't, right? And that's why I sort of meant by regrets, about not having regrets. Just learn from it. You make a mistake, absolutely learn from it. Cherish the failures so you can learn from it, but don't dwell on things you can't change at this point. And I think that's really helped me in life in a lot of ways. Is that I can maybe do better than most, compartmentalize it and just put it on the shelf, right? And today it's the same way, in that there's always challenges. Right? I'm always discovering things that I don't know, but the good news is that things that you've done, compartmentalize it, learn from it, and move on. Instead of just trying, what have I done this? What have I done this? I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. You should learn from it, but certainly you always question about something, sort of prevent yourself from making the next decision.
Yeah. And so don't dwell on these things. One of the things that's come up for me recently is I feel like I did dwell a lot on the past, and part of that was because as I started to go back into the past to figure who I was, you start to uncover more and more and more things. Like you said, you've got many stories that you didn't include in the book, and I'm sure it took you a while to uncover all those. And so now it's like, so doing like something like therapy, you know, like it seems like the whole point of some of these modalities, right, is to go back. But you mentioned that you've never been to therapy. And so I'm curious what your perspective is on something like that, you know, and why. I'm also just curious why you've never been to therapy.
So I've probably one because I couldn't afford it way back when, and now I'm just getting too old and too grumpy, I guess. But so I've never been to therapy, but I am. So I took a lot of psychology classes way back in high school, and I am, you know, I'm an introvert. Have you ever taken a Myers-Briggs personality test? I scored a 54 on the introvert scale. So there's, you know, you go to, you know, extrovert, introvert, it's, you know, it's like -60 to +60 or something like that. I was on 54, right? So I'm pretty introverted. So I sort of spent a lot of time self-reflecting, and that's probably where my therapy comes in. Is I would, you know, drive in the Texas heat, roll up the windows, turn off the AC, and just ride in the heat, just really sweating it out and thinking about things. But it's helped, right? It's just, you know, thinking about, you know, and then, you know, I certainly think about the past, think about the future, analyze problems. You know, I'm building an aquaponics system right now for my house, and I'm just constantly thinking about ways it could go wrong. And you know, my wife's going to hate me when I flood the dining room because of this, but that's a different story. But yeah, always thinking about your past, you know, how things could have been done differently and stuff like that. Just don't dwell. Don't prevent yourself from moving, taking that, and that's becoming your part of your life today, right? It is in the past. Analyze it. You know, do what you need to do with it, but certainly don't let it impact today.
Yeah, let it go.
Let it go. Yeah. You know, I don't want to start singing the song because it definitely burned into my head at this point. The Let It Go song, because my kids, you know. It's funny with kids, you know, they watch one movie and they watch it over and over and over again. So, and Frozen was one of those movies.
One other sort of snippet from the book that struck me was the only person I can ever fully rely on is myself. And, you know, I think as a young, you know, 0 to 5-year-old kid, you shouldn't. I'm not saying you right now. I'm saying like the norm should be that you rely on your parents when you're a very small creature. But from what I gather, it sounds like you did have to rely on yourself in some pretty extreme conditions.
So I think growing up, it was my sister and myself mainly having to deal with the world, and my parents were constantly working. So yeah, there's sort of resilience that built up when you do that, right? And maybe this is where I need therapy. Is like, you know, I'm too dependent on myself, right? I'm always at the end of the day, I think the buck stops and all responsibility stops at me. Sort of that sort of mindset. So where that's a good leadership trait. At the end of the day, like you know, when I first took over at one of my companies, when I took over essentially running more than half the company, right? And what I've found is most leaders would say, well, the previous leader did this, and the previous leader did that, and that's bad, and that's why it's causing all this stuff. I sort of, you know, didn't do any of that. I just said, no, it's me. Buck stops here, right? Whatever goes wrong, I took the responsibility of leading it. Therefore, it's me, right? Whether it's right or wrong, anyone else who does something wrong, really, it's just me. So you want to blame anything, any sort of fault, stuff like that, just, you know, I'm the guy to see, and I'm the guy to blame. I think whereas that is a really good leadership sort of thing, it also puts a lot of stress on myself to be able to really right the ship, or to really do things that are best for not only myself but the company or people around. But you know, that's just how I've always dealt with things. I've always been able to be the one that you know, is really independent, and I sort of wanted my kids to be that way too. Maybe not emotionally independent, but certainly in a way where really the buck stops at them. Their actions are their actions, right or wrong, however, good, bad, and different. At the end of the day, it is them who has the responsibility.
Yeah.
And I think the only time I've really been mad at one of my kids was really when they just sort of said, "Oh, it's one of my eldest saying it's Radiant's fault. It's my youngest's fault. It's your tablet. Well, she's downloaded a bunch of games or something like that, or it cost me some money on it. She's going, just take responsibility. It's your tablet. Who cares? It doesn't really matter what happened or who you gave it to, who accidentally did what. It's your tablet. Take responsibility." And that to me is the only time I really got sort of mad at her. Take ownership, right? Be independent. Take ownership. It's your tablet. It's your sort of responsibility, regardless.
Yeah, and I wonder how much that influenced your ability to pull yourself back from the edge, because one of my favorite quotes I heard is actually from Tucker Max, and he was on a podcast. They were talking about, what's the cure for depression? What's the best thing you can do for when you're depressed? And he said, everything is my fault and my responsibility. It's like, it goes back to the same thing about, minorities, whatever your struggle in life is, it's like, if you can take the perspective that it's your responsibility and that you are there because of your actions, then you can also change the course, and yep. So that's one of the very positives of that, which I appreciate.
So I think so independence gets you a couple things, right? Independence gets you obviously it allows you to do things that most people would sort of don't do or not do. It allows you to sort of shield yourself from things. The bad thing about independence, though, is that it does ultimately mean that everything's your fault, right? So, when we were talking about this earlier, certainly it helps me through a lot of times, right? Dealing with, certainly mental stress and stuff like that. It certainly helped. But I think in the darkest of dark, you really have to peel yourself back and unfortunately look at it in external focus instead of really just be too internal. And that's probably the one time when you really got to think about how your actions affect other people. There's probably other times, but I'm being facetious here. But certainly, if you're, being in this situation when you're shouldering everything, and there's expectation for yourself, and there's expectation for your family, for yourself, and expectations of, hey, we got out of Vietnam, suffered all this, so you guys can have an education, sort of mentality, right? Shouldering that all by yourself could lead to places where you probably don't want. And those are the times to really start taking a step back, look at, hey, how does my actions can affect other people around me?
Yeah, that's a good addition to that. Yeah. And we're almost out of time, and I want to be mindful of that. I have one last question. There is another quote. It says, "You still feel slightly lost and yearn for belonging you won't feel, but see this as something you can't and wouldn't change. It's just a fact." Why do you feel so strongly that this can't change?
Well, I think the difficulty about being an Asian American, right, growing up in the U.S., starting out, leaving a country at a very young age and growing up in the U.S., there's always this push and pull of both sides of both worlds, two very different worlds. I appreciate both worlds, right? Worlds. There are certainly pros and cons of both. Relating to both is I can absolutely relate to both. But really having those two external struggles, certainly Eastern culture and Western cultures, while they're very similar, they're still different. And my wife's definitely more in the Eastern culture. A lot of my friends are definitely in the Western culture. Really having someone to be able to relate to having both is difficult, right? And while I don't know whether saying never. One of the first things engineering is, or scientists is never say never, right? There's probably a low probability, I should say, but yeah, I think it's going to be finding the balance. I think best I can do is find a balance, but finding the true sort of way to merge those two worlds is going to be difficult. And that's why there's always going to be something that tells me, I don't necessarily belong in either, probably. Certainly my friends would say that, but that's a different story. But there's always something that the push and pull of those that just can't make it whole, I don't think.
Yeah. And I appreciate that also, because a lot of times we'll see people who have done something amazing, like writing a book in your case, and all the other work you've done. And then we think like, oh, they've got no problems anymore. They've got it all figured out. And I like that you sort of ended the book with, I still feel lost sometimes, and there's still going to be things, but like your motto is, don't dwell on all these things. So thank you so much for coming on, Young. It's been a very fun time talking to you. And where can people find you? I'll link the book and I'll link your wife's charity. Is there anything else that you?
Yeah, if you want to contact me, certainly my email address, and you have that. So you want to talk, chit chat, anything? That's the way to get me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Young. Have a good rest of your day. Take care.
Yep. Take care. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.